One of the first things you'll notice about server-side controls in ASP.NET is that they retain their state across postbacks. Now, this is something that in, say, traditional ASP, you would have to manage yourself as part of the post processing on the server. You would have to retrieve the values from the post body and populate whatever controls should reflect those values as part of the response. Now, this happens automatically in ASP.NET, and the sequence goes like this. You have the initial GET request for the page, and that GET request is going to initialize the server-side controls in the server-side page class with their default values, whatever was specified on the initial form. Then, if the user clicks on an element that generates a post request back to the same page, so for example, a button would do this. If the user clicked on a button to submit a request, this would generate a post message, and that message would be handled in the server. And when the server created the server-side page class, it would then initialize the value of the server-side controls with the corresponding values in the post body of the request that came back. And the end result is any changes that were made by the client in those controls in the web page will be reflected in the server-side controls, and hence they'll be there in the subsequent response issued from that post. So let me just walk you through the sequence here of what takes place in a standard ASP.NET page web form interaction. So we'll start off here with an initial GET request. So the first time a user visits a particular page, it will issue a GET request. And this particular page has a pair of server-side controls that I'm interested in. One is the name control, and one is the personality control. And the name is a text box, and the personality is a drop-down list. So when we do the initial rendering, we're going to render the text box as an input element, and the personality as a drop-down list with some predefined values. And at this point, the user sees a blank form, so nothing has been set to those values. And then the user interacts with the form, so selects a personality, types in a name, and then clicks on a submit button, which will generate a post request that goes back to the server. And in that post request will be included the values for the input elements on the client, which in this case include the name and the personality. And those will be sent back with their current values. And then on the server, the page instance, brand new page instance will be created for the page 1 class. And its name and personality values will be initialized to the values retrieved in the post body. And then when the page is rendered back to the client, those values will still be in place. So what you would have had to do sort of by hand in other environments happens for you implicitly in ASP.NET because of this concept of control, server-side control, state retention. Now let's go ahead and try this out ourselves. I'm going to go create a new simple page here to do some testing, and let's just call it state. State is fine, state page. And to put some values in here, or something to see the interaction go on with, so let's say enter name, and I'm going to drop a text box in there. And let's change the ID of this to underscore name, so it's something that reflects what we expect. And then let's also put a button in, and the button is just going to be an enter button, and we'll specify enter as the text. And let's go ahead and add a handler for that. Actually, before I add a handler, let's go ahead and put a label down below so we can print something when the user is done entering the data. So message label, something very similar to what we've done before. And then what I'll do, and let's separate these with a carriage return. What I'll do is add a handler for the button and implement the message label.text equals hi there plus name.text. So we'll extract that information and print it into the label. But what I want to show you is how these values are going to be retained across the postback when the user clicks on this enter button. So let's go ahead and run this. And what I'm going to do is bring up a tracing tool, in this case Fiddler, which acts as a debugging proxy and will eject itself between my client and server in this case. Now, a little trick, if you're using Fiddler and you're testing in a local ASP.NET page like this running through Visual Studio, it won't by default pick up any traffic, but you can sort of get it to do so just by putting a period after the local host in the URL mapped onto your page. And that period will cause Fiddler to actually intercept the request and show you all the traffic going back and forth. So that's a nice quick way to get some feedback on what's going on. So let's go ahead and hit enter. Now here's the first request and response. I'm just going to show the raw request and raw response. And this is standard HTML. There's the GET request, and the response has all of the initial default values for our form as we'd expect. Now let's go ahead and do enter a name and press enter, and that showed the form submitting here. Notice the name we typed in stayed in the input element, and here's why that happened. If we go look at the actual request and response, so the request that came across was a post request, and as the body of the post request, it included all of the name value pairs for the input elements on the form, which included the text box name as well as the enter button in this case. And then the response had those values reflected, right? The default value of the text box down here, as you see, was the name, and that was because on the server, when the page was constructed, it initialized the server-side controls with the values that corresponded to those controls in the post body. Okay, and that's why we have this state retention across post requests to the same page. I do like to point out this has nothing to do with view state at this point. You do see there is another hidden field here called view state, and we'll talk much more about that in a moment. But this standard state retention of input elements on a form actually does not use view state at all. This is purely about processing post body variables and reinstating those values as the response is issued when the user posts the form.